Hi, I'm Michael Smith for Nevada Trails. Tonight I have a very special show. I have Frankye Craig, who has written, 3 books on the Donner Party?
Yes, 3.
And one is called The Donner Party Story. The other one's called The Donner Party Faithful Journey. And the third one I do not know.
Daughters of Destiny was the second. And Faithful Journey, The Faithful Journey of Tamsin Donner was the first, which is now out of print. I've sold them all, fortunately. So I still have the 2, and I think he's going to put those pictures up on the screen.
Right, he's going to do that in post. Well, in any case, you're going to tell us about the Donner Party and the history of it, and
yes.
Educate me, please.
For people who don't know very much about the story or haven't even heard of it, I'm just going to go through the basic story quickly. This was a group of immigrants that mostly came from the Midwest, and they were headed for this place that you see behind us, California. California had been touted in the press and in person with people giving lectures. All over the Midwest, people were getting excited about going to California. They wanted the free land. They wanted good health. They wanted not to have to work at raising their crops because they were told that in California, it just grew wild. You didn't even have to tend it. That there were thousands and thousands of animals and horses and cattle all growing wild. Didn't require any work. So it sounded really, really good to them. And so many of them wanted the land, they wanted to farm, they wanted to have ranches. Many of them, the young single men, wanted to go just for adventure. I mean, just like they still do today. And when I started doing my research, one of the things that I hear a lot, I do a lot of shows, people come up and talk to me, and one of the things that I hear a lot is, oh, they were so stupid. And it makes me mad. They weren't stupid. They were following a logical course of events. And if you think about California, how many millions of people are there in California now? They all moved from somewhere else, almost all of them. So were they stupid to want to go to California?
Well, I was.
And engage in the good? You were stupid?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm not in California.
Well, now is a different thing. But I was born in California, and my grandparents moved there from Texas for a better life. Exactly the same reason that the Donner people wanted to go to California. So they weren't dumb, they weren't stupid, they just had a lot of bad luck.
Well, you had said earlier that there's a lot of disease where they're from
yes.
pollution or whatever, or not pollution, but just a lot of disease. So they're trying to get the heck out of there, because start a whole new life.
Every winter they would have the ague. They would have various other diseases that were caused from unhealthy conditions, the cold, the moisture, the humidity, it was the mosquitoes. You know, it was an unhealthy place to live.
Well, yeah, from Michigan, I'm from, there's a lot of mosquitoes. Well,
Yeah.
These people are from what, Springfield?
Springfield, Illinois. Well, the Donner families are from Springfield, Illinois, but the others came from all over. The Murphys came from Tennessee. The Breens came from Illinois. William Eddy was originally from back east, but on his way gradually out there. Several young men had been in Springfield for a while. They joined up with the Donners and the Reeds. The Reeds were also from Springfield, but they were from all over. The Breens originated in the North America, in Canada, then moved down to Illinois, I believe.
Well, did this wagon train actually start in Springfield, or did it start someplace else?
The Donner and Reed family started in Springfield. Others who ultimately ended up in the Donner family started from different areas, but they all kind of joined together on the trail because no one could leave before about the middle of May. So there was all this ganging up in camps waiting for the grass to get big enough, high enough to feed their oxen. So they all kind of left en masse following each other. And the different groups would some group would be together and then they'd get mad at each other, start fighting, didn't like their leader. They would drop back and join another group, or they'd go forward and join another group. But ultimately, before Fort Bridger, they all became members of the Donner Party. They elected George Donner a leader, the group that wanted to go to California.
So you call the Donner Party because he became the leader?
Yes, that's how the Donner Party got its name. Let's see the Independence, leaving Independence. They gathered up on the Missouri River. That's their jumping off point. And they were all unknown to each other except for the family groups. The Donner and Reeds were one group, but other families only knew each other. So they were a bunch of strangers getting together and electing a leader and jumping off from mostly Independence, some from St. Joseph. So they had to get used to life on the trail. And they had fairly comfortable homes. I'm sure the Donner families did. They had real nice kitchens back where they were in their homes. And then they had to get used to cooking in the ground. The men had to start working with the oxen and getting them trained. So it was kind of a hubbub. And they also needed to form their leadership. And George Donner and James Reed were part of the leadership for the group that they were with. I'm looking at that. You have the one of the kitchen.
That's a no. Well, in any case, they trained their oxen? I never heard that before.
Oh, yes. Oxen didn't come already trained.
I don't know how you train an oxen.
No, they had to train them to obey commands, right, left, gee, haw. They had to train them to be willing to work and get in harness. And they didn't want to do that at first. And they would just be running all over the place.
Well, yeah.
And they still did it after a long time because they didn't want to work like a lot of us. They were reluctant to pull the wagons. So every morning there was this big hubbub, getting the oxen in their yokes and bringing them together in front of the wagons. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they proceeded. They journeyed across the plains, and there's the kitchen. This is the kitchen, a typical kitchen that they would have had. You see, it seems to be quite convenient, and it was the latest technology during that time. But then their kitchen was a hole in the ground where they built a fire, and they put pots over that hole in the ground in the fire, and it was quite hard on the women. The women really had they didn't work any harder than the men, but they had many, many different jobs they had to do. They had to take care of the children. They had to break down in the morning and pack everything away. And then when they made camp at noon, they had to pull it all out again, make a noon meal. They had to take care of the children. They had to walk all the way. Very few of them rode in the wagon, maybe if they were ill.
Was that to keep it lighter for the oxen or something, or why would they have to walk?
Oh, they had pretty heavy wagons, and in the first of the journey, maybe some of them rode more. For instance, Mrs. Reed and her mother, who was very ill with consumption, they rode in the wagon. Mrs. Reed would knit, and the children rode in the wagon. But later in the journey, when the oxen became weak, they had to lighten the loads. Very few people rode in the wagons.
What's consumption?
Tuberculosis.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. So they went on across the Big Blue River. They had to ferry across the Kansas. They got onto the Big Blue. They got out onto the plains, and everything was hunky-dory. They had a really good time. It was every night they would have music and dancing and fiddle playing. And Tamsen Donner said it was like a picnic. If nothing worse happened, It would just all be enjoyable.
Wow, I didn't hear that part either. That's
Journey.
excellent. Is there any pictures
That
of the
was,
trip?
as far as Fort Bridger, and they experienced a lot of Indians, but they didn't have a lot of Indian trouble. Only one incident. It was only later on the trail that they ran into bad Indian experiences in the 1850s, after all the gold rush people went across the plains. But the 1846 immigrants had hardly any trouble, just pilfering. The Indians would come up and beg, and they had been accustomed to this. They were a completely demoralized Indian. They would beg for food, and they'd steal anything they could get their hands on. But when they came into Fort Laramie, they came into the country of the Sioux Indians. Totally different story. The Sioux Indians impressed them. They were just awestruck with the pageantry and the glory of the Sioux Indians at that time. And they watched the Indian dances. They traded with the Indians, and they had a very good opinion of the Sioux Indians at that time.
Excellent. My grandma was 100% Sioux.
Really?
Yeah, it's been good to hear something positive about that.
Well,
she was a slave, actually, but I loved her.
So she was of another tribe and enslaved?
Yes.
So she wasn't Sioux by heritage?
No, she was Sioux by heritage, but she was sold to my grandpa. It's a different story.
Oh, my goodness.
Is there any pictures of the trip?
There must be some in there somewhere.
There we go.
They made, over the years, the trail ruts. We've walked this trail, and the trail ruts 10, 15 feet deep in some areas, because after they crossed the plains, the country started compressing in between hilly areas and buttes and everything, and there were only a few routes through certain areas, and so that's how you got those really deep trails. They went on, further on, they had to make the decision, shall we go to Fort Hall, that route to California? If you have that map, the second map, that's the first map. This second map, you see this line there going up north and then back down again. That was the route to Fort Hall. And that's the one that they said, oh, there must be another way to go. And that lower line, dotted line, is the way that they actually went. And this is the Hastings cutoff.
Okay.
They had heard that Hastings had said there might be another way to go south around the Great Salt Lake. And they took that and they said, there is another way. And Hastings was on the trail, and he sent word to them, follow me to California. I'm going to lead you there. And they had other advice. Jim Walker, Kleiman, telling them, hey, don't take that route. There's no road. It's a terrible country. You can't get through. But they disregarded what they heard from these two mountain men, because I think it is human nature to take advice or listen to advice from someone who is glib and talks well and is educated and has the appearance of being knowledgeable. So they took Hastings' advice instead of Kleiman and Walker. And they took the Hastings cutoff. Big mistake.
Now, when they got this, Hastings was their guide?
Hastings was not their guide. When they got to Fort Bridger, they found Hastings had already left with 60 wagons. They had a decision to make. What do we do? And they made the decision as a group. The only one who expressed that she felt it wasn't the right decision was Tamsen Donner, at least that in the record. And so they thought, okay, this is logical. We're going to be following him through the wilds of the Wasatch Mountains. That group is making the road. All we're going to have to do is just follow him. And so that's what they did.
Well, I think making the road would be really tough.
When they got to Weber Canyon, we have a picture of Weber Canyon. They found a note from Hastings, and it said, don't follow me. Okay, they're already in there. It's like being pregnant. We can't go back, you know. They're already in the mountains, and they have a note that says, don't follow me. But go and look for me, and I'll tell you another canyon that's going to be better. And so they did. They sent two men ahead, and James Reed was one. So they found Hastings, and he told James Reed from the top of one of these mountains, he pointed to a canyon and he says, look, I think you might be able to get your party through over there. You can't follow us because you don't have the manpower. It was too hard getting through that canyon. So James Reed goes back and says, okay, what do we do? So they made the decision, we'll have to chop our way through. 3 weeks, they chopped their way through the Wasatch Mountains. 3 weeks made the difference. And if they hadn't had to do that, we wouldn't even be talking about them today. So they finally got through the Wasatch Mountains, and they got out onto the desert. Another horrible obstacle. James Reed lost all of his oxen but 2. They ran off searching for water. They never found them. They were delayed a week more looking for their livestock. So he had to borrow oxen. All he had was 4. He had to leave wagons. George Donner had to leave a wagon. Louis Keseberg left a wagon. They had started losing things now. And all along the desert, the Nevada desert, they lost livestock to the Indians. They would pick them off. They'd shoot arrows into them, weaken them. They couldn't go on. So the party would leave. They couldn't handle that any other way. And the Indians would then consume, I presume, the livestock. So it was a terrible ordeal just getting across the desert. What happened was they separated into groups, family groups or groups that knew each other or had attached themselves to one group. So they didn't have a large enough company to defend well against the Indian depredations.
Well, excuse me, Frankie, we're going to go ahead and take a short break, and when we come back, you'll let me know about what's going on with the wagons. I'm sorry. Thank you.
What lies beyond the curve in the trail? What secrets are there? My feet carry me into its veiled mystery, and I want to taste the sweet air and hear the song bestowed by nature. Just this once. Until the next curve, the next trail, the next walk through the Carson Valley. The Genoa Foothill Trail System will connect the Carson Valley with the Tahoe Rim Trail, providing a wonderful trail system near the oldest town in Nevada. This is just one of many projects the Carson Valley Trails Association is working on for our communities, but we cannot do it alone. Please contact us by visiting our website and find out about becoming a member or signing up to help build our community trails. We're looking forward to seeing you out in the most beautiful land Nevada has to offer.
Hi, we're back from break, and we're with author Frankye Craig. And at break, I was asking about where can I buy your books? I don't know.
My books are available on my website, DonnerPartyHistory.com. They're at Borders, Barnes & Noble, the Airport Store, Mark Twain, Nevada Historical Society. Now my mind goes blank, but
Happens to me all the time.
quite a few. The Legislative Gift Shop.
That's a nice gift shop, by the way.
Yeah.
And do you do a lot of lectures and things like that as well?
I do. I have a slideshow presentation.
So if someone wanted to do a presentation, how do they get a hold of you?
My email, which will be on the screen, frankieebd@aol.com.
Sounds good. Okay, well, we don't have a whole lot of time left for the rest of the Donner Party, but
Okay,
how about give us some of the highlights here?
We were in the desert, and there was one thing that happened in the desert, which is a very important part of the Donner Party story, and that is on this sandy hill. They were pulling their wagons up this hill, and the party, as I mentioned before, was in segments, and this is one segment of the party. And as they were pulling the wagons up the hill, James Reed and John Snyder, who was a teamster for the Graves family, got in an altercation. And you can imagine by that time what kind of shape they were in, mentally, physically. And for some reason, James Reed became so angry that he could not control what he did, and he pulled his Bowie knife and stabbed John Snyder in the chest.
Oh, geez.
He felt it was self-defense because Snyder was whipping James Reed with a heavy whip handle, And James Reed's wife was in the middle of it when she became alarmed and went in. So this was a real factor because James Reed, even though George Donner was named the leader, James Reed was actually more of a leader than George Donner was. So they banished James Reed from the company, and he was forced to go on. And so he said, okay, I'm going to go on to California. I'm going to bring back supplies. And he did. He left. They denied him even a horse and a rifle, but his daughter then brought those things to him later in the night, and he went on to California. So they lost his leadership. And George Donner was a good man, but he was not a leader. He was just too nice to be a leader. So they struggled on, and many, many mishaps came to them. When they came to the Sierra, they were trapped in 2 separate camps.
Oh, geez.
And snowed in. They could not get over the pass. So they had to make whatever arrangements they could. The Donners made a makeshift teepee-like thing out of quilts and hides and ponchos, and lived in that for 3.5 months, the whole entrapment. The others made cabins at the lake. The first group got to the lake about October 31st, and the first rescue party did not come in until February 19th. And they came in 2-week intervals, 3 rescue parties. About half the people had died by that time of starvation and exposure. And they took them out, but even as they were taking them out of the mountains, they came across terrible hardships because of blizzards coming through. Tamsen refused to leave her husband, who had a very bad injury in his hand, but George Donner must have been a very strong man, because an infection that bad normally in those days would kill them right away. George Donner was one of the last to die. He didn't die until about April the 1st.
Oh, geez.
So she stayed with him, and she sent her 3 daughters out. And the rescuers took those daughters down the hill to Sutter's Fort. My book, Daughters of Destiny, follows those daughters for 7 years and tells about their, I guess you would call it another ordeal at Sutter's Fort. They were orphaned. No one took them in for a while. They were ragged, poor. They didn't even have enough food. They went from house to house, kind of vagrants, until finally 2 of the girls were taken in by a German lady. It's one of the saddest stories of the Donner Party.
I'll have to read the book. Wow. And then this is, where did they end up in California?
Well, they were all headed for Sutter's Fort. It was about the only place that could give them goods and help them get established. But a lot of them the Reed family went on to San Jose, and incidentally, Reed did come up and help rescue. He led 2 groups out. And he was not ever castigated for his murders, if that's what it was, or his defending himself against John Snyder. And he never, ever mentioned it. It didn't happen in his conversation. So obviously he felt terrible about it. But he was very successful after that.
As far as the cannibalism, how did that actually come out? How did they find out about it? Did
the cannibalism?
People the Donner Party tell people they did this? Or?
They were very matter of fact about it. The people, most of them who had to, for instance, Mary Graves, she wrote a letter home and said, very matter of factly, we were forced to eat our dead. And then the rescuers, when the rescuers came in, there was evidence in both the camps of cannibalism. And it was sensationalized. That's the sad, sad part.
Well, yeah, that's the real sad part. That's one reason I'm so curious about this story, because I can't picture this. Really, I can't. Really, I mean.
Can't picture what?
Eating a person.
if you were starving and you had eaten your leather shoelaces and you had eaten a mouse and you had eaten bark and there was nothing else, you would probably slice off some meat off the dead bodies. Most humans would. Now, some of the members did not do that. Whether they made that conscious decision or whether they didn't care anymore, I don't know. But not all of the Donner Party did consume human flesh.
So there was survivors that...
Yes, the Reed family never did have to. But a lot of the cannibalism took place on the rescue out of the mountains. The people, the Forlorn Hope Party who tried to escape, there were 15, only 8 got to the foothills, and they consumed most of the others.
Wow.
The Graves family, some of them had to. They were trapped from blizzards. They had no food whatsoever coming out. They did. And then people in the camps.
Well, through your research, you've actually found letters of this fact and met ancestors and things like that, because you've done a lot of research.
I've met a lot of descendants, but very few of them know anything at all firsthand. It just was not passed down.
That's what I was thinking, too. You would try. It was a bad idea to tell anybody, probably.
They were ashamed. They were so ridiculed and treated so badly that they just clammed up. They did not want to admit to it after that because of the ridicule. Keseberg was the most maligned. Louis Keseberg, the last man to come out.
Wow. And they still have a state park for where the Donner Party is right now? Is that...
There's 2 sites at Donner Memorial State Park where the 3 cabins were. And then there's a site in the Alder Creek Valley where the Donners made their camp.
Wow. So you can come as a tourist and check out these locations.
Yep.
And you can get your books and learn more about this before you get there.
True.
Is there anything that you'd like to really talk about these stories, about the human aspect that you were, through your research?
Let me just say that I've written my books in order that the reader will be able to make an emotional connection with the people. They get the human side of the story.
That's the main thing, is the human side of the story, because especially from reading what you have talked about, the 15 people and who try to get out on snowshoes, and you said, what, 7 or 8 of them died? That's 8 died, and that's a very emotional part, because I think you mentioned some of the 2 guides were killed as well, the Indians.
The 2 Indian guides were helped along by 2 bullets.
Yeah.
Supposedly they would be dying within the hour or so, and William Foster took his rifle and ended their misery, as it was said, and they were consumed. That's kind of a further blot on Donner Party history.
Pretty tough history, and well, I'm going to have to read your books because it's just too much to say in a short show like this. And if you want to go ahead and give out your website again, and where they can contact you as well. DonnerPartyHistory.com, and my email address, frankieebd@aol.com. They'll see it on the screen, I think. Well, it's a very touching story. I can't imagine going through that kind of hell. I don't know how you can even picture it.
Some of them gave up.
I've been stuck up there in the snow. Just that part of the country is. I can't imagine being on a wagon train and being stuck and being tired, and exhausted, and wet, and like you said, eating shoelaces and whatever. And well, anyways. Thank you very much for joining us on Nevada Trails.
My
this
pleasure.
story was a little bit too long for a 30-minute show, so get out there, read our books, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you, Frankie.
Bye-bye.
It's been Michael Smith for Nevada Trails.